No, it's not your fault when you open a pivot table and don't really understand what goes in each field, filters, rows, columns, and values. It's genuinely hard to find a clear explanation on how each pivot table field is actually supposed to be used. Let me give you an example here. I need to know the total value produced by product, by month, and by status. So over here, let me take the product and put into rows, put the status into columns, put the month into columns too, and then take total value and drop into values. Okay, so I built my pivot table. Total value by product, by month, by status. But is that actually correct? Because when I look at the pivot table, it's a completely mess. I can sort of see the product and the value, the month, the status, but it feels like nothing makes sense, right? So let's do this properly, hands-on and step by step. And yes, you can download this spreadsheet too, so we can really learn how to use pivot tables. To build our pivot table here in Excel, the very first thing we need is a spreadsheet with data. And in my case, I have a production spreadsheet, but you can also use any other kind of spreadsheet you have, such as purchasing, sales, logistics, HR, inventory, and so on. And if you want, you can download this exact spreadsheet I'm using so you can follow along with me in the video. Now, based on the spreadsheet I already have, what I'm going to do here, it's very important to turn this spreadsheet into a table in Excel because a real Excel table has many benefits. So let's do that. I click the first cell in the sheet, click and hold and drag all the way down to the end so that way I can select the entire data set. Then up here on Insert, I go to Table, and Excel asks me whether my table has headers. And in my case, yes, it does. So I'll leave that box checked and click OK. Great. Now I already have a real Excel table, and it's from that table that I can build the pivot table. So that's already one excellent advantage of using a real table in Excel. Now let's go back to Insert and click on Pivot Table. The first thing Pivot Table asks is whether you want to create it in a new worksheet or an existing worksheet. And what is the difference between those two? New worksheet means Excel creates a brand new tab for you down at the bottom. And existing worksheet means Excel places the pivot table whatever you click. For example, over here on the right side of the same worksheet you're already using. And personally, I'm gonna be honest, I prefer creating a new worksheet because that way we separate the source from the analysis. The raw data stays in one place and the pivot table stays somewhere else. I think that's cleaner, so I'll choose new worksheet, click OK, and done. Now, as we can see, Excel created a new tab for me where I have the pivot table area on the left and the pivot table fields on the right. And basically, those options we see here are the columns from our table. So we have date, machine, product, category, status, and so on. If you are using a different table, it doesn't matter because then all of your own column names will show up here instead. And down here is the part where a lot of people get confused and end up making mistakes. We have filters, rows, columns, and values. So how do you actually use each one of those areas? That's exactly what we are going to learn now after those initial setups. So let's start with this. What does a pivot table help us do? It helps us summarize information and build analysis. So based on your spreadsheet, I think, let's think about it. Let's go back to the first sheet just to make it, just to see it clear. Think about what kind of summary or analysis you want to create. In my case, I want to see, for example, the total value. I want to, what do I mean by total value? In the last column, I have the total value produced in money. So I want to know the total value. Great, now I know what I want. I want to see the total value. And now the question becomes, let me go back to the pivot table sheet. Where do I put that total value? Which pivot table area should I use? That's exactly where the confusion starts, right? So let's do something very practical here. Let's place that total value in each of those areas and see what happens. That way we discover what each field is actually used for. And as we keep going through the video, we gradually build pivot tables that are a little more advanced each time. So here we go. I'm going to take the total value. And how do we do that? You click, hold, and drag it into one of the fields below. Let's start with the rows, okay? So click, hold, and drag the pivot, the total there. And now the total value is inside the rows. When I look at the pivot table, what happens? Excel lists those values row by row. So that's what the rows field does. It lists the select item one row under another row. That's it. But does it make sense for me to see each one of those values one by one like that? Not really. I don't think so, because I want to know the total of those values, not list them individually. So let's try something else. I'll take the total value and drag it into columns. Let's see what happens. We can click, hold, and drag it there. Now in the pivot table, instead of listing it row by row, Excel is listing it column by column. So that's what column view does. Row means one line under another line. Columns means one column next to another column. One field organizes things vertically, then another horizontally, but it still is not what I want. So let me take the total value, click, hold, and drag into the filters field. And if we go to the pivot table, now nothing is showing except a little drop down box in the header. That little box is the filter area we just used. So if I click that drop down, what shows up? Each of those values turn into a filter option. So the filter field is used when you want something to act as a filter. For example, maybe you want to filter by status, paid, open, overdue, canceled, etc. Or then filters, or you want to filter by month, by year, by category, and so on. But it's still not what I want. I want to see the total value. So let me go back to the fields area, and the only field left is values. So I'm going to take the total value, click, hold, and drag into values. Now Excel shows me sum of total values. And when I go back to the pivot table, finally, I can actually see the total value, the sum of total values. So whenever you need to see the total of something, a total, a sum, a count, some kind of numeric result, you can use the values area. And when I say value, I'm not talking only about money. Yes, it can absolutely be money, like total money in, total money out, total sales, but it can also be quantity, percentages, counts, and more. And besides sum, pivot tables can also show average, minimum, maximum, but we'll get into that in a little bit, okay? So we solved the first problem. However, let's go one step further. What is that total value? It's money, right? So let's apply the correct formatting. Let's make it look like currency. And how do I do that in pivot table? I go to the field I created, click sum of total value, and choose value field settings. Excel opens a new window where I can click number format and choose any number format I want. I can choose number, currency, accounting, date, time, percentage, and so on. And in this case, I want currency. Account can also work, and it's very similar. Mostly the difference is visual style, in my opinion, okay? But both mean money. And I will choose currency. Click OK, and OK again. Great. Now the number is formatted as money. So that was our first analysis. But what if now I want to know the total value by product? How do I solve that? Because if we go back to the source table, I have lots of values and lots of products. But now I no longer want just the grand total. I want the total by product. So how much total value does XOB have? I would have to add up every XOB row that appears here. So how can I do that with a pivot table in Excel? Let's solve that. I'm going to click on the data source just to select it, and I'm going to insert another pivot table from the same source table. So that's why I selected it before. Now here in the here within the pivot table new window, it's a very important option to choose. We're gonna use this time the second one, the second option, existing worksheet, because I do not want to create a brand new tab. I want to use the worksheet I already created. So I click the selector, that is the up arrow, and I go to sheet 1. We can skip one column, and next to the first pivot table, click the next column, confirm, and click OK. That's it. Now we have pivot table number 2, and what do I want to know in this one? The total by product. Think about it. We already learned how to show the total. We can just use the values field. But what about product? How do I show the products? I think we learned that too. So if I want to see each product, I can show them in rows or in columns. In this case, I think rows looks better because it grows downward, and I think it's easier to read. So I'm going to take product, click, hold, and drag it into rows. Why? Because again, that way pivot table organizes each rows as one product. Now I can already see each product I have, but that still it's not enough in my opinion, because I also want to have the value by product. So what is missing? We can take the total value and put into the values. Simple. We already know how to do that. So I'll take, again, the total values, click, hold, and drag into the values. Now, when I look at the pivot table, I can see not only the grand total, but also the total value for each product. And just as a quick curiosity, to understand the pivot tables a little better, what if I go back to the fields area and remove product? Click product, remove field. When I go back to the pivot table, it goes back to showing just the total value. Then if I put product back into rows, click, hold, drag into rows, I once again get total value by product, because now each row is one product. And what if I took product and put it into columns? So let's see what happens. Click, hold, and drag it into columns. Now, instead of listing product by product one under another, the pivot table lists them column by column. One product in the first column, another one in the second, another one in the third, and so on and so on. And what if I take product and place it into filters? Let me click and drag into the filter. What is going to happen in this situation? The pivot table shows the total value, but now I can filter the total by product. So if I click the drop down and choose only one product, like let's say gear A, click OK, then Excel updates automatically and shows me only the total for that selected item. So now I think we are starting to understand a little better how each pivot table area works. And in this case, because I want the total value by product, I can use any of those display areas, depending on how I want to see it. So all of those configurations are right. Total value itself belongs in value, okay? That's it, because that's what gives me the total. But where should product go? It depends. It depends. It's your choice. So it becomes a matter of preference. We saw that filters, rows, and columns were all able to show the same information, however, in different ways. And if I leave product in filters, I can just choose one specific product and click OK to see only that total for that specific product. But if I put product into columns, let's do that. I can also see total value by product. And if I take the product and put into rows, I can still see the total value by product too, but in a different arrangement. So it depends. It depends on your personal preference and on which layout feels clear for you. Okay, so I prefer this format that I'm showing right now, product listed in rows and values next to it. For me, that's the best option. Now, what if I want to know the total by product by month? Now we have 3 criteria: total value by product by month. So how do we organize that in a pivot table? Let's go back again to the first, the data source, and we can insert another pivot table. Remember, existing worksheet, click the up arrow, go back to the sheet 1, click a spot to the right, confirm it, and click OK. Now I need total by product and by month. Total value, you already know how to do, right? So let's start there. I take total value, click, hold, and drop into values. Excel shows the grand total, but I'm only see the overall total. It's not yet breaking it down into products and months, category, status, or anything else. So what do I want now? I want to use products and months. So let's do this. I'm going to take date because that's something we haven't really used yet. I click, hold, and drag date into rows. Why into rows and not filters or columns? Just because, in my opinion, it's look more organized that way. Rows let me see informations one row under another row, which I find easier to read. But in a moment, I also show you what happens if we move date into columns or filters too. So let's see how this setup looks. Now I can see month by month, January, February, March, April, and the value. So now I know the monthly total, but I also want by product, total value by product and by month. So how do I solve that? Before we do that, let me make one quick adjustment here. In this pivot table, whenever I use dates, Excel automatically groups them. It may group them into days, months, quarters, years, depending on the range of dates you have. In my case, it grouped them into days and months, but I only want the months. What does that mean? When I go back to the pivot table here and click the plus sign, you can expand it and see months, days, and more details. I don't want to keep expanding the pivot table. I don't want to see the days. I only want the months, so I can remove the extra date grouping levels, and because I'm not going to use them, I'm going to keep just the month level, January, February, March, and so on. Now, how do I bring products into this? There are several ways to do it. Let me show you the first one. I could take product and drop it into filters. Why? Because then I'll be able to filter by product and see month by month the value for the product. This is the first configuration. I can already see one product by month. I just click the filter and select the product I want. For example, Axle B. Click OK, and there is it. All the monthly values for Axle B. And if now I want panel D instead, I can go there, OK. That's one way to do it. It's right, it's correct. But I could also show the total value by product using a different configuration. Let me take the product out of filter and move it into column instead. Let's see what's going to happen with the pivot table. So now each column becomes a different product. The row stays as months, and each column becomes a product. That way I can also see, for example, year A in June produce around 9,000 in total value. So this setup also let me analyze value by product and by month. And besides that, we already saw filters and columns. And what if I take product and put into the rows? So now the layout becomes month first and product underneath. Now inside each month, if you click the little plus sign, you can see each product. So in January, I can see the money value for each product. That means I can also analyze how much value each product generated in each month. Same analysis, still possible. So we are beginning to notice that pivot table can organize in many different ways. Filter let you look at one thing at a time. Rows and columns, on the other hand, can show you everything at once, either one under another or one side by side. But now I have month and then product. What if I reversed that order and put product above months? Let's try it. So click on the product and drag it above month. Now if we go back to the pivot table, we can see this layout right here. It organizes by product first. So product becomes the main group. In fact, I can collapse everything and only see the list of products. And if I expand one product, Excel shows me each month for the product and its values. So again, I can see total value by product, by month. It all depends on the layout. What's my personal opinion about that, honestly, this looks really good too. If you want to see the total value for each product and for each month, that's also an excellent combination. Now, to finish, we already saw the yes, okay? It's possible to use more than one field inside the same area, but is it also possible to use more than one field inside values? And the answer is yes, it is. And if I want to see not only the sum, but also average, minimum, maximum, or count, that's also possible. So let's start by adding another value field, and I'm going to take quantity, click, hold, and drop it into values together with total values. Notice the order I used: first total value, then quantity. So in the pivot table, the columns will follow the same order: first total value, then quantity. And if I reverse it then and put quantity first, look what happens here. In the pivot table, now quantity shows first, and then total values come second. So what I can see now, month by month, product by product, within each month, both the quantity and the total value for those products. And what if I want to organize it differently? I could, for example, take month and move it into filters. Let's see. And then I can filter by month and look at the products, the quantities, and the value produced. I could switch to May, for example, click OK, and again the pivot table filters itself to show just the quantity, value, and products related to May. And what if I want another kind of filter? Maybe I also want to filter by status. And how would that work? I could take status, click, hold, and drop it into filters too. Then I would have two filters at the top of the pivot table, month and status. And now I can play with them. Let's say right now I'm looking at May, and maybe now I want to see only the status maintenance. Click OK. Yeah, nothing, it's blank. But what if I switch to stop it? Okay, so gear A is stop it. And what if I want to have completed? Let's go for this status. Okay, great. Now I can see the completed value in May, product, quantity, and the total value. And besides using filters like this, of course, you could also configure the pivot table in different ways. So no, you don't always need to rely on filters. You can combine rows, columns, and other setups too. Now, what if I want to use only two rows? How would that configuration look? I need to see products, quantity, total value, month, and status. That's quite a lot of information, right? However, here's what I would do. I would put product in rows, then month underneath it, and status underneath month. And let's go to the pivot table and see what the layout looks like. We have product, month, and status. Now we can see, for example, this item C right here within February, and then the two possible status with quantity and the value for each status, each month, each product. I can see everything. So yes, this is also easy to read. A pivot table can show information in many different ways, whether you use rows, columns, or combining multiple pieces of information together. Now, here's another cool idea. Instead of showing total values, and what if I want to see the average value? Well, let me go back to the earlier pivot table. I click, I build it. Let me click inside it. And yes, the part matters. Why? Because if you click in the first pivot table, the field panel on the right edits the first pivot table. If you click the third pivot table, the panel edits the third pivot table. Since I want to edit the second one, I can click the second pivot table. And what do I want to change here? Instead of sum of total value, I'm going to click the field, open field settings, and now instead of sum, I want average. But I could also choose maximum, minimum, count, and etc. Here, count means exactly that, counting how many times something appears. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. How many times does each product appears, for example. And for this example, I want to use here the average. However, before I click and confirm, look at the value currently showing. It's around 375,000. If I switch it to average and click OK, the value changes automatically. Now the average is about 3,000, very different from before. And now I can see the average total value for those products. So I really hope, guys, this video can help you out, understand the logic behind how pivot table works a little better. And yes, it is completely flexible. Maybe you prefer a layout using filters, while I prefer a layout using rows because pivot tables summarize your information. But the way you choose to summarize, it's up to you, okay? So I really hope this video helped you a lot. And if you have any questions or any suggestions to the next videos, let me know, comment down below, and I see you in the next one.